If you could imagine for a moment that you had been accused of domestic violence, you would be shocked because you know that you have never been violent towards your partner. But despite your protests of innocence, a domestic violence protection order has now been issued against you. Suddenly you find yourself in a legal battle, fighting not only to clear your name, but also to maintain your relationship with your children. Unfortunately, this scenario is becoming increasingly common. In many cases, false allegations of domestic violence are made in order to obtain a protection order and gain an unfair advantage in child custody proceedings. The statistics are staggering, and as some of you may be surprised to learn, over 700,000 people are incarcerated each year in the United States due to false allegations of violence or domestic violence. For these individuals, it is no surprise that these false claims also cost taxpayers $3 million in associated costs every year. Today, we are very pleased to speak with our guest, a filmmaker and director of media and publications for the Washington State chapter of National Parents Organization, Stephen Hicks. Stephen has been working to shed light on the issue surrounding domestic violence protection orders and false allegations and bring it to the forefront of public consciousness. Now, Stephen, we would like to welcome you to our show. Stephen, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, domestic violence protection orders are clearly not a light topic. And
No.
I want to say that I think, the very first thing in my mind that we should probably discuss here is just what this issue is really about. When we speak about domestic violence, it doesn't just affect people in divorce proceedings. It can kind of be used just as a full coverage. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this subject?
So first of all, domestic violence is a problem. It's a very serious problem. And, my understanding of the policies of the court and the legislature is to establish laws which reduce it. That's the whole goal, obviously. And when there's children involved, particularly, that's bad for kids. Kids, it's unhealthy for them to be around in that kind of environment. Now, that said, the statistics that I've seen show that about 10% of civil domestic violence protection orders are actually warranted. That leaves a really large amount of people compromised by this system that we have. And that means, so if, let's say, your partner goes in, you guys are having problems, and there's the opportunity to go and file for a divorce. So typically a parent will go in to file for a divorce, but what often happens is they're asked if there's any domestic violence happening in the relationship. And whether there is or not, typically a parent will have the opportunity to file a domestic violence protection order. And if there's a lawyer involved, they're often encouraged to file for one. Now, what that does is that sets a precedent for later. If someone wants a domestic violence protection order, they can get one very easily. And our current laws, as of last year, the legislature has established coercive control laws, which means that a parent can go in and just say they're afraid of the other partner, and that's enough to issue, for a commissioner to issue a domestic violence protection order. That often is abused and used to gain an advantage later in custody hearings, because if a parent is under a custody order, then or a domestic violence protection order, then they're viewed as the problem, and they're often targeted. This can lead to parental alienation, unfair custody arrangements later, and it's often very traumatizing, not just to the kids, but to the parent who's targeted. So this is kind of like been an ongoing problem for 20 or 30 years, but there's mechanisms in place. There's sort of conflicts of interest happening because there's a lot of money that flows. for example, under Title 4D and the federal funding programs for child welfare, family welfare, and domestic violence, there is matching funds. So when a state issues a bond to set up a welfare program for domestic violence shelters, and by the way, these shelters are mainly for women. There are no shelters in the state of Washington currently for men who experience domestic violence. And incidentally, the statistics do show that domestic violence is about equal between men and women, which kind of goes against the grain of what we've accepted politically in our political views. So anyway, the money that flows from Title 4D is matching funds to help pay back the bonds to the states. The requirements under Title 4D in the Social Security Code are interesting because they require statistics, and specifically how many domestic violence protection orders have been issued, paternity statistics, for example, and quite a few others. There's like 9 or 10 different statistics that they require. So this is gathered by the Domestic Violence Statistics Protection, the National Domestic Violence Statistics Agency in San Diego, California. They gather all the statistics from all the family courts in all the states and then submit them to the federal government as per their requirements for releasing the matching funds to help pay back the bonds. That kind of creates a cycle.
An incentive.
Yeah. And so, what we're trying to do at the National Parents Organization is establish a equal parenting presumption, which would obviate the motives. And how that works it's a little complicated, and we can get into that. But so these motives and these incentives that it generates a lot. There's over $90 billion a year that's generated in the divorce industry itself, all the surrounding industries,
And I read one statistic that claimed
it's a lot of money.
25% of divorces will result in some sort of domestic violence being asserted between a partner. What does this do exactly to a family? Well, let's say,
I don't want to get in too much into my own experience, although I've had my own experience in this, and this is kind of why I've become active. But it's traumatizing to be away from your kids. If you're a loving parent and you're struggling with conflict in your relationship with your spouse, it's very stressful. And so, and that brings up an interesting point, because one of the things we've learned is that domestic violence is highest right during that 2 to 4 month period after a domestic violence protection order has been granted. That is when a parent is separated from their kids. It's kind of like poking the bear. Your kids are the most important thing to you. Maybe you guys don't agree on school or where you want to live, or someone's struggling with a job. Usually money issues are a driving force behind conflict in relationships. So the two main issues are money and children. Those are the two things that parents fight about the most. And when you issue a domestic violence protection order against one parent, they can't see their kid anymore. And that's often when people get angry. They might stalk the other parent to try and find their kid. They want to be with their child. It's sort of a natural disposition of a parent to want to be there and protect their children.
And once the law steps in, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't stop at just separating an individual from their family. It can have implications on their job, on their life.
It sets up a domino effect in a person's life. I was arrested for a violation of protection order. I didn't actually do anything. I think what I did was I sent, if I recall correctly, this was almost 9 years ago, I sent a Christmas card to my son, and that was something that violated the order. So I had police at my door. I was arrested. There were 3 other allegations that were false, and I ended up in jail for 5 days. My cat wasn't fed during that period of time. It was really heartbreaking and tragic, and I can remember just being very, very angry. And of course, if you're a parent and you're compromised in this way, and you show up in a family court situation and you're angry, it doesn't look good. A lot of parents, like myself at the time, they can't afford a good lawyer, a good representation. It's hard. You're unprepared for this situation. So it can oftentimes have domino effect. And of course, you're looked at by your neighbors and your friends and even possibly your employer as someone with a domestic violence problem. And that can seriously compromise many areas in your life. So
researching this subject, I have to say it's such a vast topic. It's a very deeply emotional issue for those who have had to deal with it. I guess, I'd like to ask you, how do we define in our modern courts what exactly domestic violence is? Because you mentioned at our opening,
really good question.
There's a law currently, and this is, I imagine, here in Washington State, that highlights what you said was coercion.
Coercive control laws are the latest, and that pretty much means that if a parent feels like they're threatened, if they just feel that, if they feel threatened, then that can be an indication that there's coercive control going on. And I think everybody understands that in a relationship, there's always coercive control. People, you want what you want out of a relationship in your family. You have motives, your partner has motives, and we kind of try and influence the people around us to get what we want. It's sort of a natural thing, and most people do that in a healthy way. And there's compromise, but sometimes that can get a little bit more manipulative, and one person could be more controlling than the other. But I just want to say that, we're not against domestic violence protection orders.
Right.
We want them, but what we want is we want due process. We want it to be seen by a judge. We want to be able to question our accuser in court. We want to be able to question the evidence. And we want commissioners and judges to be held accountable for their determinations, which means that when they make a determination in domestic violence case or in a parenting case where they're determining custody, we want them to write down the reasons why they make those determinations. And that sets up a rebuttable presumption, which means that, let's say you have, one parent says, oh, well, my ex has mold in their house. I don't want the kids over there. So the judge decides to give custody to the mother because there's a dangerous situation at the house. Well, he or she would have to write that down, and then that would give the other parent the opportunity to go and maybe get a mold inspection. If there is mold, get it taken care of, and they can go back to the court and show the evidence and say, well, this was the reason that the custody was unbalanced. Now that's taken care of, so now there's no more reason.
Do you find that there's critics to the changes that you're trying?
Oh yeah, we're up against the Bar Association is probably the most adamant. They speak the loudest in the commission hearings in the legislature. They promote domestic violence policy. It works for them. Let's face it, there's so much money involved, and when cases can be dragged out in court, it means more money for the lawyers. They have jobs. They rely on this money for their own livelihood. And, that might sound like a sharp attack, but
the truth is, when you find yourself unexpectedly in a situation like this, quick representation is really your only resource when you have no one else to turn to. And that's, it's interesting that you bring up the lawyers because, in researching this topic, most of the information that I was able to find regarding the misuse of these laws was presented by lawyers. And maybe that's so that they can sell their product and say, hey, when this happens to you, you're going to need us. But ultimately, this is happening to 700,000 people a year, and that number is just staggering.
Well, there's domestic violence advocacy groups, which are funded by lawyers in the family law circle. But there is a rising concern of parental alienation. And so when a child is separated from a parent, there is just catastrophic problems that occur, and they're not really seen right away. They're seen later over time as the child grows. And this leads to lower graduation rates, higher crime rates, higher drug use, just a whole host of social problems can be traced back to parental alienation.
What happens to a kid who's been alienated from a parent who's been falsely accused? What does that do to that relationship?
Well, whether they're falsely accused or not, the child doesn't know the difference. We are focused on the falsely accused, which is a great majority of the cases. But what we want to be really careful, because what's happening is false allegations are becoming so prominent that it's compromising the people who actually do need protection and suffer from, severe domestic violence situations. So we're trying to obviate that. And we have like a really good solution. If someone comes to the court asking for protection, if they genuinely need it, they should get it. And the way that can be done is to provide the court with as much information as possible on both parents. Currently, it's skewed to one parent. So if I accuse my partner of domestic violence and the court, there's very lax evidentiary laws right now. It's not like criminal court where you need strict evidence. It's very loose. So hearsay is accepted, for example.
Yeah, because the laws, in this case, they try to be more proactive. So you could almost say one is guilty until proven innocent.
Yes, that's a serious condition that we're currently dealing with. And so, so for example, as I was saying, there's if you're in that situation and you're accusing the other parent, the commissioner says, well, and by the way, you only get about 10 minutes in court to argue these things. And you don't get to question your accuser. You don't get to question the evidence. It all happens very quickly. So that's one of the problems that we're dealing with. But the other is that, let's say, okay, the commissioner issues a protection order, and now they want to gather evidence against the person who is accused. So they might have to go to drug testing. They might have to go to psychological evaluations. They might need domestic violence treatment and so forth. But the person who brought the allegations against the other parent doesn't have to do anything.
Suffers no consequence.
So that's in a case where there's false allegations. If we could set a precedent where it doesn't matter who comes in with the allegations, the court needs to know what's really going on. So if there's an order for drug eval with one, there should be a drug eval for the other. If there's psych evals for one, there should be for the other as well. So that way, this would obviate a parent from coming in and thinking about false allegations or using this as a tactic, because they would be subjecting themselves to scrutiny as well.
Do you feel that would cost individuals who are in, situations that are credible, valuable time?
No, because I think if there's an order in place, then they are protected. That's what they need.
So you're not saying to not put the order in place, but to give more of an option for an individual to clarify the scenario or to present their side of it.
Well, it equalizes the situation.
Yeah.
So, like, if I were to be, if I were thinking I needed protection, for example, and I brought my partner in, I wouldn't mind being tested for whatever drug use or evaluated psychologically, or even going in for DV treatment myself. It wouldn't matter to me. I would do whatever it takes, because I would want to protect myself and my child from violence in the home. On the other hand, if I was just using this as a tactic to gain advantage, then the court would probably find out through this information gathering phase, which
I'm curious,
takes a couple weeks.
In your opinion, what happens when an individual recants a statement of an allegation of violence, but the state has already stepped in? Is it reversible?
I have never heard of anyone ever being held to account for perjury in a family court. It just doesn't happen.
But the perjury persists.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's probably more perjury in family court than any other place. As you can imagine, people are pointing fingers. And of course, families and spouses and families in conflict are thrust into this adversarial court system, which just exacerbates and perpetuates the very problem that they're trying to resolve or need help with. And it's a domino effect, and it can just make things a lot worse. And that's why I brought up the fact that domestic violence happens most often during that period of time where someone goes into court. So, there's no perfect solution for any of these things, but there's a lot that we can do to help treat parents as equals. Usually in domestic violence situations, more often than not, it's a problem with both partners. It's just who reported it first or who went into the court first. That's usually the person who gets an advantage, and they usually plan it out first. You get a lawyer first, you ask your friends, what can I do, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get out of this situation. So, or maybe you're just mad at your partner, or you're disappointed things didn't work out. And I've heard anecdotally a lot of stories where so lawyers might coach a person to say what needs to be said to get that advantage in court. Oftentimes gathering whatever evidence they can get, and this can even lead to provoking your partner to violence by deliberately saying certain things or inciting arguments. They might record the conversation, anything that they can get against their partner. Text messages are often used in court to justify protection orders. Facebook posts, people are getting their Facebook posts copy pasted and submitted to the court to show like, oh, this person is angry. And I mean, I don't know any parent who wouldn't be angry if they're separated from their kids, unless you don't really want to be involved in your kid's life. And there are people like that, in which case you wouldn't, there wouldn't be an issue.
Stephen, we're down to our last few minutes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But you were making a film.
I am.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So the film is called Best Interests. And I've been traveling across the country, speaking to a lot of fathers, some mothers, family court attorneys. There's a growing movement of parents who are just fed up with the court systems. I even met a parent who two parents who went through the court system for 10 years, spent over $600,000 fighting for equal custody, and they looked at each other finally after 10 years and just said, this is stupid, what are we doing? They ended up getting back together and raising their kid together, and they're very happy with it. It's amazing. I've met so many different people. I've interviewed the leader of the National Parents Organization, Don Hubin, who, if you have an opportunity to look up and read his articles, he's emeritus of the Ohio State University philosophy department. He's commented on and issued his writings to Congress regarding these types of legal issues, and he's impressive. He's amazing. So I've been traveling. Now I'm back in Washington. We're just about ready to go into post-production. I interviewed two representatives in the state of Washington and 3 senators on this topic. That'll be included in the movie. I'm really excited about it. It should be done by summer.
Stephen, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much,
today.
Ash. I appreciate your time.
Domestic violence is a serious issue, and it can have devastating impact on those who are suffering. If you or someone who you know is in immediate danger, please call 911. There are also many organizations that offer support and resources for those who are experiencing domestic violence. Some of these include the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and your local domestic violence shelter here in Kitsap County. You can also reach out to the National Parents Organization for resources and support. Together, we can work to create a safer and more just world for all. Remember, it's not too late to reach out for help. And to those who are suffering, know that you are not alone and that there is hope. Thank you for watching.